Elderly veteran rescues abandoned K9 trapped in mud. What happens next will shatter your heart. The storm roared like a wild beast, the rain pouring down in unrelenting sheets, blurring the world into a swirl of gray. Amidst the chaos of nature's fury, one figure trudged forward, lost in the downpour. Walter Grayson, a war hero once celebrated, now drifted through the streets of a town that had forgotten him. His military jacket, now weathered and torn, clung to his frail body like a reminder of battles long past. Every step he took was slower than the last, each one dragging him deeper into the shadows of his own memories. Time had not been kind to him. His legs ached, his heart was heavy, and his once proud face was now a map of sorrow. He didn't look for anything. He wasn't searching for redemption or a second chance. He just walked because walking was the only thing that made sense in a world that no longer had a place for him. He had no destination, no one left to remember his name, and no one to tell him it was okay to stop. But then, in the midst of his solitude, the storm seemed to whisper a different story. Suddenly, through the howling winds and the relentless roar of the rain, came a sound sharp and unmistakable. A bark. Weak, desperate, and filled with an undeniable panic. Walter's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, but his body froze. The cry pierced through the storm, echoing in the silence of the night, and for a split second, the world around him stood still. It wasn't just any bark. It was a call for help. It was a cry from somewhere deep, somewhere that resonated with the pain and loss that Walter had known all too well. He turned, trying to pinpoint the sound in the fury of the storm. There it was again, a cry for survival, fading but still there, desperate and heartbreaking. Walter squinted through the rain, and there, at the edge of a construction site, he saw it. A K9, a trained warrior, trapped in a pit of thick, sucking mud. Its body writhed against the mud, its paws scrambling, but every movement pulled it deeper into the abyss. The dog's eyes met Walter's. Wide, terrified, and full of a desperation Walter recognized all too well. It wasn't just struggling for air, for life. It was fighting against the same fate he himself had wrestled with for years, the feeling of being forgotten. Without thinking, without hesitation, Walter moved. His feet, aching with every step, carried him into the storm, through the mud, and toward the dog. There was no time to wonder if he was too old, too broken to make a difference. There was only one thing in his mind now. He couldn't leave this creature behind. Not this time. As Walter pulled himself closer to the struggling K9, memories surged like a tidal wave, drowning him in their force. The sound of artillery fire, the screams of soldiers caught in the chaos of war, echoed in his ears. Faces, lost and nameless, flashed before his eyes, their haunted expressions forever etched into the corners of his mind. He saw his comrades fall, young men with hopes, with dreams, now nothing but fading ghosts in his memory. The weight of their absence crushed him with every breath, a constant reminder of the battles he fought and the ones he lost. The war was long over, but for Walter, the fight never truly ended. It lingered in his soul, in the stillness of the nights he spent alone, when the silence was broken only by the ghosts of his past. But here, in the midst of a storm, in the presence of a creature struggling against the same relentless forces, something in him stirred. The screams faded, the memories softened. For the first time in years, Walter could focus on something else. The dog's cry snapped him out of the nightmare that had been his life, pulling him back to the present moment. The K9's frantic eyes bore into Walter as he stepped closer, every movement aching with the heaviness of his age. It wasn't just a physical pain, though. It was a deeper kind of exhaustion, one that comes from having lived a life without purpose. Each day had blurred into the next, each one colder, quieter, and more distant than the last. Walter's life was a series of days spent waiting for something, anything, to break the monotony. He had no family left, no one who remembered the man he had once been. His military service, once a proud chapter, had now become a distant, irrelevant story. But today, the storm had brought him something he hadn't expected. something that made the endless days of walking in the rain feel a little less meaningless. He wasn't just wandering anymore. He had a purpose, even if only for a few moments. As Walter finally reached the K9, his hand trembling, he saw the same brokenness in the dog's eyes that he had seen in the mirror for years. The K9, a proud warrior in its own right, was battered, bruised, and on the brink of collapse. It wasn't just the mud holding it down. It was the weight of its own past, its own battles fought and lost. In that instant, Walter understood. He understood the fear, the loneliness, the exhaustion. He saw in the dog's eyes the same pain he carried inside. The emptiness of a life abandoned by those who should have cared. The scars of a battle never fully healed. It wasn't just a K9 in need. It was him. It was a broken soul just like his. For the first time in years, Walter didn't feel alone. He felt seen. And in that shared understanding, he knew, whatever happened next, he wouldn't leave this creature behind. The rain lashed against Walter's face, stinging like 1,000 needles, as he kneeled beside the K9. The mud was thick, almost alive, pulling at his legs, slowing him down with every desperate move. His hands shook, not just from age, but from the gravity of the moment. Time was running out. The K9's eyes were fading, its breath shallow, each gasp weaker than the last. The storm roared on, indifferent to their struggle. Walter's body screamed in protest. His old war wounds, his aching joints, all of it flaring up with every movement. But there was no turning back now. No hesitation. With every ounce of strength he could muster, Walter plunged his hands into the muck, pulling the dog's body toward him. The K9's frame was heavy, limp, soaked in filth, but Walter didn't care. He couldn't afford to care. The storm could rage, the mud could try to swallow them both whole, but he was determined. This battle was worth fighting, and he wasn't going to lose it. Walter's heart pounded as he fought against the elements and his own body's limitations. He gritted his teeth, struggling to lift the K9 from the deep pit. Every inch of progress felt like a victory, but every time he pulled the dog up, the mud tried to claim it again, as though nature itself was determined to keep them trapped in its cold, unforgiving grasp. The dog's ragged breath was a constant reminder of how much was at stake. Walter's hands trembled, his body aching, but the life in his arms was still fighting, still holding on. He refused to let it slip away. Each tug felt like a small miracle, a life still clinging to existence, a man fighting for one last chance at redemption. With a final heave, Walter managed to lift the K9's body high enough to escape the worst of the muck. He stumbled backward, almost falling, but managing to catch himself, his breath ragged and desperate. But they weren't out of danger yet. The K9 was still unconscious, still barely alive, but Walter's will was unyielding. He had come this far, he wasn't going to stop now. Finally, with one last, nearly impossible effort, Walter managed to pull the K9 onto solid ground. Both of them collapsed, Walter on the wet earth, panting, his body giving way to exhaustion. The K9 lay beside him, equally battered, its chest heaving in shallow breaths. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm continued to rage, but it felt distant now, as if the world had somehow paused. Walter's mind buzzed with the effort it had taken to get them both this far, but he couldn't focus on that. Not yet. All that mattered was that they had made it. They were alive. They had made it out of the storm. Walter closed his eyes for a brief moment, his heart still racing, but there was a flicker of hope in the quiet. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. The K9, once a symbol of abandonment and despair, now lay beside him, a living testament to survival, to the bond that had formed between them in the storm's fury. They had saved each other. The storm had passed, but the cold still lingered, creeping through the cracks of the small shelter Walter had found for them. The fire crackled softly in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Walter, exhausted yet determined, sat beside the K9, who lay curled up on an old, tattered blanket. The dog's ribs rose and fell with shallow breaths, each one a reminder of the battle it had fought to survive. Walter's hands were still trembling, but he found comfort in the stillness of the moment. The rain had stopped, but the night was heavy with an unspoken understanding between them. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The silence was their companion now. Walter gently stroked the dog's matted fur, his thoughts drifting back to the days when he used to sing songs around campfires with his brothers in arms. Softly, he began to hum an old army tune, the kind they used to sing to pass the time, to drown out the horrors of war. The dog's ears perked up at the sound, its eyes opening slowly, as if sensing the comfort in the familiar, soothing rhythm. Walter continued, whispering the words of the song, as if sharing a piece of himself with the creature beside him. The warmth of the fire mingled with the warmth in his chest, and for a brief moment, he didn't feel so alone. In that quiet, shared space, the bond between them began to form, fragile but undeniable. Days passed, each one a small step toward healing. Walter spent hours feeding the canine, cleaning its wounds, and slowly gaining its trust. It wasn't immediate. The dog, once a fierce protector, had been broken. Not just physically, but emotionally. It flinched at every movement, hesitant and cautious, unsure if it was safe to let its guard down. Walter understood. He had built walls too. He had spent years hiding behind his own pain, pushing away the world, afraid to trust again. But day by day, as he cared for the canine, he began to see the same wounds in the dog that he carried inside. He knew that trust wasn't something you could demand. It was something you had to earn, slowly, carefully, with patience and understanding. And so he sat by the dog's side, never pushing, always patient. He spoke softly, his voice low and calm, never rushing, never forcing a connection, just presence, just time. The dog began to respond, just a little at first. It leaned into his touch, relaxed slightly when he spoke, its eyes softening with each passing day. Trust, once shattered, was starting to rebuild, piece by fragile piece. It was on the third day, as Walter sat by the fire, that he decided it was time. He looked down at the dog who had fought so hard to survive, the dog who had reminded him of his own brokenness, and yet had given him a reason to keep going. "You need a name," Walter muttered to himself, his voice rough with emotion. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years, not like this. He hadn't named anyone in years. But this was different. The dog's eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now looked at him with a quiet understanding. Walter's heart clenched. You remind me of the shadows," he said softly, a wistful look in his eyes. "Not because you're bad, but because, like me, you've been through hell. And the shadow is what's left behind when the light is gone." Walter paused for a long moment, the weight of the words settling over them both. "Shadow," he said at last, the name rolling off his tongue like something he had always known. "That's what you are. Shadow, my friend." The dog's tail, weak but steady, thumped once against the blanket. It was a simple thing, but to Walter, it felt like the start of something beautiful, something worth fighting for. Walter hadn't expected anything out of the ordinary when he brought Shadow into the clinic. It was just a routine checkup. The dog had healed enough, and Walter thought it was time to ensure that Shadow was ready for whatever came next in their shared journey. The vet, a kind-hearted woman with gentle hands, scanned the dog's body, checking for signs of lingering injury. Shadow, though much stronger than before, was still tense around strangers, especially medical professionals. But Walter sat beside him, rubbing his head and whispering softly, reassuring him that this was just another step toward a new life. After a few moments of checking, the vet paused, her brow furrowing as she slid her fingers down to Shadow's neck, feeling something unusual. "Just a moment," she murmured, turning her gaze toward Walter. "Let me check for something." Walter's heart skipped a beat. A sense of unease crept over him, though he couldn't explain why. He'd grown so used to being in control of situations, but this moment felt different. The vet held up a scanner, moving it over Shadow's neck until it beeped with a signal. "I found it," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that didn't sit right with Walter. "A microchip." Walter stared at her in confusion. "A microchip?" I didn't know. The vet's face grew serious as she continued. Let's just confirm something. The vet ran the microchip's information through her system, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as the data slowly loaded. Walter's mind raced, questions swirling in his head, but he held his breath, waiting for the inevitable answer. Finally, the vet looked up at Walter, her face pale. I'm sorry, Walter. This dog, Shadow, he's not just a stray. He's a retired military canine. The words hit Walter like a punch to the gut. A retired military canine? How had this dog ended up in the state he had found him in? Abandoned, alone, struggling in the mud? It didn't make sense. The vet continued, her voice low and heavy. He was part of an elite team. He served overseas, in some of the most dangerous missions. After his handler passed away in action, it seems like he was just discarded, left behind, with no one to care for him. Walter's chest tightened as he processed the words. This dog, the one he had fought alongside, had a history as tortured as his own. Both of them had served, had bled for something bigger than themselves, and both had been left behind, forgotten by the very people they had sacrificed for. The revelation struck Walter like a lightning bolt. His mind flashed back to his own experience. The years spent in the military, the camaraderie, the sacrifices, all of it felt so distant now. And just like Shadow, when he returned home, he had been cast aside. His country's promises nothing more than empty words. His hand gripped the armrest of the chair, his knuckles white as the weight of the betrayal pressed in on him. He wasn't the only one who had been discarded. Shadow had been abandoned too, left to rot in the streets like some forgotten tool after its usefulness had expired. The thought made Walter's blood run cold. Both of them, soldiers who had given everything, now sat together in this small, sterile clinic, treated like they were nothing more than broken objects, discarded when they were no longer needed. Walter looked down at Shadow, who lay still, his eyes soft but haunted. He understood now. Shadow wasn't just a stray, a lonely dog in need of rescue. Shadow was a reflection of everything Walter had become, a man whose life had been thrown away after the battle was over. And just like that, Walter knew that they weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for justice, for the recognition and respect that they both deserved. It was no longer just about saving Shadow. It was about claiming what was rightfully theirs, dignity, purpose, and a future that wasn't defined by abandonment. Together, they would fight for a place in a world that had left them behind. Each night, as Walter sat by Shadow's side, a heavy silence would settle over them. It was the kind of silence that whispered the things they didn't want to face. Their failures, their losses, their regrets. Walter couldn't shake the memories of the battlefield. The faces of the men he had fought beside, the comrades he had lost, the lives he hadn't been able to save. It haunted him. The feeling of helplessness, the gnawing regret that no matter how hard he tried, he hadn't been able to protect everyone. Now, it was Shadow he was trying to save. The old, weathered K9 lay beside him, breathing shallowly as the scars of war, both physical and emotional, were etched in every line of his body. Walter's hands trembled as he touched Shadow's fur, the familiar pang of guilt tightening his chest. I couldn't save my men, Walter whispered to himself, the words barely audible, lost in the quiet of the room. But maybe I can save you. The guilt was suffocating, an ever-present weight on his heart. But as he looked down at the dog, something shifted in him. He couldn't undo the past, but he could make sure Shadow never felt alone again. He could give him a future, even if it was one that had been denied to them both for so long. Night after night, the quiet was often broken by the sounds of Shadow's nightmares. His body would stiffen, and his eyes would snap open in terror, filled with images of his past. The dog would growl softly, his body tense, as if reliving the moments of fear, violence, and loss that had marked his military service. Walter would be jolted awake by the frantic movements of the dog beside him, his heart racing. He could feel the remnants of Shadow's trauma, the same kind of trauma that had haunted him for years, ever since the war had ended and he had returned home, only to find himself lost and broken. Walter would reach out, placing a hand on Shadow's trembling body, offering what little comfort he could. His voice was steady, a quiet promise in the night. "You're safe now, Shadow. You're not alone anymore." There were no words for the kind of pain they both carried, but there was something in those moments, in the shared silence and the comforting touch, that spoke volumes. They had both been through hell, but now, in the quiet hours of the night, they were finding a way to heal together. Walter would sit there, his own eyes heavy with sleep, but he never left Shadow's side. He wouldn't leave him, not this time. One evening, as the fire crackled softly and the night settled around them, Walter found himself lost in thought. He had always carried the burden of his past. The things he couldn't change, the men he couldn't save. It had shaped him, defined him in ways he hadn't even realized. But now, with Shadow beside him, something had changed. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He wasn't just fighting for himself. Looking down at the dog, Walter made a silent promise. "You're not alone anymore, soldier," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "You'll never be alone again." For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The pain, the guilt, the weight of the past. It all seemed a little more bearable, a little easier to carry, knowing that they weren't alone anymore. Together, they would face the world, no matter how broken it was, no matter how broken they were. As the days passed, Walter's and Shadow's bond grew stronger. In those quiet moments between the two of them, healing began. Walter, with his steady hand and patient heart, started teaching Shadow the small commands that had once come so easily. Sit, stay, come. Simple, yet powerful gestures that connected them in ways words never could. Shadow, despite his painful past, followed each command with unwavering devotion. It was as if he had made a silent vow to Walter, one that could not be broken. The dog's movements were no longer jerky and hesitant, but fluid and certain, each step matching the rhythm of Walter's heartbeat. There were times when Walter caught himself smiling, watching Shadow's eyes glint with trust and loyalty, a far cry from the frightened animal he had first found in the mud. The dog wasn't just learning new commands. He was learning to trust again, just as Walter was learning to trust life once more. Together, they were rebuilding themselves piece by broken piece. Walter knew he had a new purpose now. He had come to realize that his war wasn't over. It had simply changed form. The battlefield had shifted from foreign lands to his own community. And with Shadow by his side, he began to help the other animals who had suffered as they had. Abandoned, forgotten, broken. Together, they went to the local shelter, walking through the rows of cages, offering comfort to the animals who had been left behind. Walter's weathered hands gently stroked fur, offering a soft word of encouragement to the dogs, the cats, and even the injured birds. Shadow would sit quietly beside him, sensing Walter's quiet resolve, offering a calming presence to the animals who had been through so much. As they walked together, it was clear that this was where Walter's healing truly began. He wasn't just saving animals, he was saving himself, one act of kindness at a time. Word of Walter and Shadow's bond began to spread through the small town. At first, it was just whispers, stories of the old veteran who had rescued a dog in need. But soon, people began to take notice. The way Walter walked through the world now was different. He wasn't the broken man they had once seen, the man who had hidden himself away from the world. He was standing tall, with purpose, with Shadow at his side. The townspeople watched as Walter and Shadow visited local farms, animal rescues, and shelters, offering their time and love to animals who needed it most. It didn't take long before others were inspired to help as well, drawn by the unbreakable bond between the man and his dog. The town began to awaken, its heart stirred by the love, compassion, and strength that Walter and Shadow shared. Walter had thought he was alone in this world, but now he realized that in helping others, he had found a community. Not just of people, but of animals, all brought together by the same unspoken understanding. They had been through pain, but together, they could rise above it. The signs had been there for weeks, subtle but persistent. Walter's breath was shorter, his hands trembled more than usual, and the pain in his chest had started to return. a constant reminder of the scars his body carried from years of service. But he didn't pay much attention. He couldn't afford to. Not now. He had a new purpose, a new mission. To live, to help, and to make sure Shadow never felt abandoned again. But one night, the weight of his years caught up to him in a way that he couldn't escape. As he sat by the fire, talking softly to Shadow, the pain hit like a freight train. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, and before he could even call for help, his body gave way. He collapsed onto the floor, his heart failing him in that moment of desperate silence. Shadow, who had been lying nearby, leapt to his feet, ears standing up, eyes wide with panic. He nudged Walter with his nose, but when no response came, the dog's instincts took over. Walter was slipping away and Shadow wouldn't let him go. Shadow had seen enough to know what was at stake. The two of them, bound by their scars, had been through too much to end like this. And so, despite the storm outside, despite the darkness and the cold, Shadow's courage surged. He bolted out of the door, his paws pounding the ground as he ran through the howling storm. The wind slapped against his face, the rain soaked through his fur, but none of it mattered. He didn't know how far he needed to go. He didn't know who he was going to find, but he knew he had to bring help. He couldn't leave Walter alone. Miles stretched out before him as he sprinted through the night, driven by a force that was both primal and pure. The storm raged on, but Shadow didn't stop. He couldn't. The bond between him and Walter had transcended the limits of loyalty and love. Hours later, drenched, exhausted, and desperate, Shadow found the help he needed. He led them back, racing against time, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't just the rain and the storm he had to overcome. It was the weight of everything they had been through together, a weight that could break anyone else. But not Shadow. Not this time. When they arrived, the sight of Walter, pale, barely breathing, was enough to stop even the bravest. The doctors worked quickly, giving Walter the care he needed, but it was clear to everyone. Shadow had saved him. As Walter was stabilized, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Shadow stood by his side, his fur matted with rain, his body shaking from the effort. But his eyes never left Walter, watching over him as if he was guarding the most precious thing in the world. And for Shadow, he was, in those quiet moments, as Walter slowly regained consciousness, he felt the warmth of Shadow's body beside him. He could hear the dog's heavy breathing, the soft thud of his tail against the floor. It was as if the storm had finally passed, leaving only the calm aftermath of loyalty, love, and survival. Walter reached out with trembling fingers, placing his hand on Shadow's head. "You saved me," he whispered, voice hoarse. The tears that had been hidden deep inside him for so long now flowed freely. He had always thought of himself as the one who saved others, the one who had fought battles for the people he loved. But in this moment, it was Shadow who had fought for him, and it was Shadow who had won. "You're my hero, too, buddy," Walter whispered, his voice breaking. And Shadow, with all the grace and simplicity of a true companion, nuzzled into Walter's hand, as if to say, "I will always be here. You're never alone." Walter and Shadow, though survivors of unimaginable battles, were no longer defined by the scars of their past. Together, they had created a new narrative, one that was written in the language of love, healing, and mutual understanding. Walter, once a man trapped in his memories, had found solace in Shadow's quiet companionship. Shadow, once a dog abandoned and broken, had discovered the true meaning of loyalty through Walter's patient care. Their lives had become a testament to the power of healing together. The world around them had seen it too. A man and a dog who had walked through the darkness of war, abandonment, and loneliness, only to find the light together. Each day, Walter's old injuries faded a little more, not because his body healed, but because Shadow's presence in his life filled the void. And Shadow, though haunted by his past, no longer trembled when he was called upon. He had a purpose again, a role in Walter's life and in the lives of the people they had come to inspire. The two of them, broken souls, had saved each other. The town that had once overlooked Walter and Shadow now saw them in a new light. The people who had watched as they rebuilt their lives together couldn't help but feel moved by the bond between the old veteran and his loyal dog. Their story had become a beacon of hope for the entire town. In an act of gratitude and respect, the town decided to honor Walter and Shadow with a small statue. It was simple, but its meaning ran deep. To those who were never left behind. The statue stood tall in the town square, the image of a man and a dog sitting side by side, their heads turned toward each other as if they were always watching out for the other. The plaque beneath it captured their essence perfectly. Two souls who gave each other a reason to live again. A bond forged in loyalty, earned through shared scars. Every day, townspeople would pause in front of the statue, remembering that the greatest stories of survival are not the ones told through victories in war or wealth, but through the quiet, unspoken acts of love between those who never let each other go. In the end, the story of Walter and Shadow is more than just about two lives saved. It's about loyalty, a loyalty that isn't demanded, but earned, through shared scars, quiet sacrifices, and the willingness to stand by one another, no matter the cost. True loyalty isn't about grand gestures or empty promises. It's about showing up when it matters most. It's about standing beside someone or something when the world has turned its back on them. It's about healing the invisible wounds, the ones that no one else can see, and doing it together. Walter and Shadow had found that, and in doing so, they had built a legacy that would live on in the hearts of everyone they touched. Their story would not be forgotten, because it was a story of what it truly means to never leave anyone behind, no matter how broken they may seem. And in that, Walter and Shadow had given the world a reminder. Sometimes, the greatest battles are the ones fought not on the battlefield, but in the hearts of those who refuse to give up on each other. Walter and Shadow's story isn't just about one man and one dog. It's about the power of loyalty, the strength of bonds formed in adversity, and the transformative healing that comes when we stand by those we love, no matter the cost. Their journey teaches us that sometimes, the most profound acts of courage happen in the quiet moments, when we choose not to give up on each other. If Walter and Shadow's story touched your heart, share it with others. Let's spread their message of unwavering loyalty and the belief that no one should ever be left behind. Share this story with your friends, family, and community. Because in a world that often forgets the invisible wounds we carry, we can all be the ones to help heal them, just like Walter and Shadow did.